A teacher's liability, his participation in curriculum design, and his discretionary power. So here's the outline. I will first talk about citizenship, how an individual, his responsibility in a society, and especially as a teacher in a profession, how a profession has a certain collective liability in a society. And then I'll talk about, given the public accountability of the profession, of the teaching profession, what it is to confer power for teachers to teach. And then I'll go on to a management question about discretionary power of teachers. So this comes out of my PhD, an extension of my PhD research on ethics and citizenship. Okay, so firstly, when we talk about someone's worth, especially as a teacher or as a scholar, it depends, for example, on the social good of the research outcome, how much it benefits society, and also the score, how much it makes it contributes to the ranking of the university. So these two things are at least the consequence of employing someone or having someone having an office, and especially it is along the measure of impact, efficiency, roughly put, given the same manpower, how much is output and effectiveness. Let's say, you are dealing with a set of students, and how many of them learned, and how that measures the effectiveness of your teaching. So then it contrasts to an incompetence. On the other hand, if we go further to talk about meritocracy, it goes beyond instrumentality. It goes beyond what's useful, because we want on deserve what someone deserves, given one's competence, given how much one has trained one's own skill. We can see from his performance that he is competent, and that's why someone deserves the power to occupy certain office, and correspondingly, he would have some duty. And of course, when we talk about teachers, then he is to teach well. And of course, in contrast, there will be an abuse of power, and this goes beyond only being incompetent, because with the power, being merely incompetent, you're not just doing that good, but an abuse of power. I'll go discuss this a little further later on. So these two things will be important as we go on. So as a profession, the university or the academia, it is an institution in a society, because we recognize the institution in the society, and when the institution judging on expertise decide to confer certain title, then ordinary citizens are supposed to trust the corresponding awardee, right? Because let's say a group of PhDs, so most scholars have a PhD, they form a peer group, right? And if they so decided that someone has the expertise, and he earned the title, and he will be one of us, and to join the peer of being a doctorate holder. And of course, only deciding on expertise, we might run the risk of someone being insincere, and that would be again that's someone having a title deservingly. It is in contrast to someone insincere, and that begs for denouncement of having a title because of the collective liability, because someone has a PhD, and the conferring university has a liability towards having that recognition on someone. And going back to the whole society, because of that recognition so given by the institution, it is even on legality that, let's say, a student can rely on a teacher recommending us on reading, or even, of course, we are to understand, let's say in the mathematics, a proof, but then there are still things that we rely on a teacher, word of mouth, or even a selection of readings. There are things that we can rely on. And on the other hand, if we were to go for an institution that's less recognized, right? So when we take a course from a in institution that's more recognized, we're more ensured that it has a lower risk that it is not up to standard. So these things are important as let's say university in a society, the liability that we have, and of course, given the division of labor, the different institutions, the hospital authorities, and teaching, there is us, so we can specialize. And of course, the one important thing is that given a specialization, the risks are minimized, because if one person were to be insincere, then he doesn't do everything. So the risk of abuse of power through insincerity is minimized. So the division of labor is important for these two things. And of course, given that the authority of, let's say, a teacher or a scholar, the whole legal structure, the channels of complaint, when in cases of malpractice, right? So all these things goes to here, the public accountability, because, well, of course, human beings have human rights, but some of us may be engaged in other professions, and with regard to the teaching profession, the right to teach, the professional right, to enforce that right, we need to be empowered. We need to at least to be recruit students, or at least to teach a course in which students can enroll in. So the empowerment in order to enforce the professional right. And of course, the very important thing is that right is deserving only if one discharged one's duty. So professional right only if professional duty discharged. And the discharging of duty, there's a rule, and especially with teacher, most at least minimally, teachers are to transfer knowledge, right? To at a very bare minimum, students are to acquire knowledge from teachers. So let's say that on a knowledge rule of assertion, when we say things, when we through testimony, given students trust and our sincerity, they come to know something through our verbal behavior, through our testimony. So assertion, that's a knowledge rule of teaching, a knowledge transfer rule of teaching. And in cases of incompetence, it's only about redistribution. Maybe we would employ someone that teaches better, right? So that's at the level of only about instrumentality, how well a teacher performs, and in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. So, and of course, with such empowerment, a teacher also has some discretion, because let's say given other teachers who has taught a course, that he might not have encountered students with certain responses or novelty. That's how the academia progresses, right? Because students raise questions that no one has thought about, and then we don't always have an answer that's been prescribed to us. And of course, about rewarding or even punishing, there's a proportionality at our discretion. How well the two students, and one does better than the other, but how does the grading differ? So there's some discretion, but of course we want to standardize that, and I will talk about standardization later on. So here we see that the individual interact with the collective, because as a profession, we have to be publicly accountable, and there's a collective liability, the professional ethics, and also there are personal ethics about, especially with cases in which we are to decide or given our discretionary power. And if we were to abuse the power we are vested with, that's more than just incompetence. And I think that's where we have to bring in meritocracy and discernment, because it raises the question of whether certain abuse of power is to be retributed and or reprimanded in a more entrepreneur language. So given all this at the management level, because teachers are both to be liable for what they teach, but also there's standardization, or the whole collective, right? The whole profession, or at least a a university or a division. They have to be accountable to a certain set of courses, and it needs standardization, learning outcome, assessment, how we assess how much we've reached the learning outcome, how much we've, how well we're performing. And but then I would, a simple question is about curriculum design. Well, are we doing vocational training or education? Well, very clearly, vocational training, a textbook based teaching, a certain textbook, we can answer the questions in the textbook. Then in terms of vocation, we can give correct responses. But there are more things to education and beyond textbooks, and especially given the diversity in research, there are people that different students, different teachers might have different choices about textbooks, and the question of autonomy and about individual teachers' liability comes in. And then that's why I think teachers' participation would matters in curriculum design, at least having a say about how the curriculum is to be, or maybe minimally having a list of a textbook that that if it is to be confined, then we can allow teachers to make suggestions. So that's standardization. It's important, but also balancing the point about autonomy and in the end liability, because we are, and teachers are individuals in a collective, and their liabilities together, but there are also things that teachers are to be liable themselves. So lastly, a little distinction between a mere information transmission, knowledge transfer, knowledge increment. Yeah, that's learning. That's important, very, very important, and especially well, the students grow in knowledge, and that's an important thing. But also, we want something more. We want them to develop a certain skill, and instead of only learning something, we want students to learn. And in order to understand certain fact, given some research, and to acquire the skill to think and to think about themselves, and especially when they are to leave the classroom and encounter novel cases themselves, whether in research or in the daily life, that kind of skills that we want to equip them with, it is best if the teachers have gone through similar experiences, because there's a difference between being a mere conduit of information to present the materials from textbook, and speaking from one's own understanding. And to speak from one's own understanding instead of relying on a text. Of course, there are textbooks that are good, that's gone through peer review. But if one were to discern, given that there are reasonable disagreements among scholars, there are bound to be a textbook that some teachers think are better, and especially with some teaching materials. If we allow teachers that discretionary power so they can depend on their own discernment, and at the management level, how we balance this, the teachers' autonomy, academic autonomy, with the whole standardization, and given our collective liability, our public accountability towards the public. And I think it's like a spectrum of a teacher that teaches a lot of people, and because the discipleship is like a tailor-made one-to-one thing, but it's not only about being tailor-made for the student, it's also being tailor-made from the teacher. So, all right, so here's a summary. I talk about the individual and the collective in the society, how the collective is publicly accountable, and what how the individual interact with the collective in a society.